as if something happened long ago, so dark, so shameful, that he had to really even be careful to speak it out loud. Not just for me to listen, but for his own ears to hear coming out of his mouth. As he sat and he smoked, he finally said, looked at me with his blue-green eyes that were fading to gray as he got older, and with a very sincere and discerning face, he said, after holding one long deep breath, I have held one very shameful secret. One very shameful secret inside. And as he took a deep breath and let it out, as if to finally get it off his chest, he said he finally felt safe enough to reveal it to the world, or to me. He used that word specifically, safe. I found that to be a little bit strange or out of character, I guess, for him. What could he possibly mean by safe? Of course he was safe. Did he feel like he was gonna be put in jail? I wonder. I didn't want to push him too much, so I stayed quiet. He said he regretted never telling the police that he was almost certain of the identity of a killer. Needless to say, after hearing that, I gently begged him to tell me the story, but with a lot of hesitation in his solemn face. so much stronger and more intense and more foreboding. Before he fully subsided, before the attack fully subsided, he happened to look out his window in his front yard in the winding dark road. Beyond it, there was someone out there, standing out there. Somebody at the curb. It was a little before 2, a little before 2 in the morning, and it had begun to snow just so slightly. John put on his robe and his shoes, and he opened his front door. The woman out there did not move. She was holding one arm up at her side in a very awkwardly strained way. John called out, but she did not answer. As he moved closer to her, he heard a small sound and realized that the woman was wearing little finger bells on the tips of her fingers. Being that was a little bit strange in itself, they thought about hesitating, but kept going because he did not want the woman to freeze, or maybe she was hurt, for she was wearing a tattered dress and shoes and a ragged brown dress. She was gently clanging those little bells, those finger bells, softly as she stood in the falling snow that was gathering high around her feet and her tattered shoes, and clinging to her raggedy brown dress. but she didn't answer any of them except one. Except one. When he asked her if she needed something to eat, she said, "I swallowed a farmer's eye in Lancaster." And then she opened her mouth wide as if to show him the eyeball that she'd swallowed. However, her mouth was empty. And she closed her mouth again, and with a smile that was strangely wide and almost wicked, she clanked her finger bells. Her finger bells, clank, 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 clank them, clank them, clank them, clank, clank, clank. And she gestured to John to follow her to the guest room. His plan, if he could not get any information out of this woman, he was just trying to keep her safe and dry and call a friend at a county hospital to drive over in an ambulance. As soon as dawn came, he did not own a car himself, and he has never had one since. He sat her on the bed, and she looked up at him and told him that she would try to go to sleep, but that sometimes they shook her head about. They shook her head about. There came no indication of who they were. John asked her once more if there was someone he could call. To this she responded that she did not even close to being who he thought she was. Perplexed, he stood back, stared at her, and to this she responded to his reaction. "You make me laugh, you make me laugh." And she threw her head back, and at first scared my grandfather. As she did this, for it was more maniacal and evil than it was of a young woman in her 20s lost in the snow. It was a strange voice that started to roll off her tongue and out of her throat. At first it was her voice, and then it changed, manipulating through her vocal cords, something he could not explain, but that was and did not feel from this went back upstairs, but he could not go to sleep after that. That is for sure. Thinking about this strange woman that he had downstairs while he was upstairs. Oddly physical malady, and having this stranger on the floor below him, it wasn't going to happen. Sleep would not come to him. Sleep would not come to him tonight, so he sat in a comfortable chair and smoked his pipe, staring out the window into the snow, which had started to come down thicker and harder, collecting quickly under the ground. Since she had entered his house, more than a foot of snow seemed to have gathered on the ground. How is that possible? He's almost talking to himself as he's telling me this story. It was so perplexing and confusing to him. Disturbing was a better word. But he just stared into the snow for 2 hours. He called an ambulance. And they said it would take 20 minutes to get there in the morning because of the snow that was piling on the ground. And he knew it too. He was used to this. 2 hours passed and his eyes were getting heavier. He just could not keep them open any longer. He could not keep them open any longer. But then a sound came. Quietly at first, as his eyes were just about to seal shut, when he heard a faint jingle of those little tiny finger bells she had attached to her tiny little hands. After 2 hours of sitting there waiting, as he was just about to sleep, that is when he heard it coming closer and closer, and when he finally heard it clear as day, it was so close it seemed to be not coming from downstairs, but coming from a very close place, right outside his door practically, or maybe just down the hall. He got up, and he thought the sound had come from as close as the top or bottom of the staircase. Now that the woman was not there, he stood in that same spot for a full half an hour. A full half an hour. A full half an hour, but the woman was gone. He stood waiting, but for all he knew, the stranger was asleep. She was not in the staircase or the stairwell or anywhere he could see from where he was standing. He slowly walked downstairs with the utmost precaution, knowing somehow intuitively there was something about this woman that terrified him. She was not real. Something about her felt very, not as if she came from this world. As he's walking down the stairs, as each foot land, and then one stair, and then the next, as he's descending, the sky is starting to light up with pinks and oranges and fiery reds as the sun opens up and enters, flowing through the tree. Oddly beautiful at the same time. As he got downstairs, he called the hospital from the kitchen and let the ambulance know that they could head out as they had promised the night before. From the kitchen, and the ambulance agreed that 20 minutes it would be for them to get there. It would have been 10, but the snow was really piling up and falling harder and harder and harder. The wind was also picking up. John waited on the back of the porch, closing the door behind him, not wanting to even check on the woman. When the ambulance arrived, proceeding very carefully up the drive. They were proceeding carefully proceeding up the drive. They were proceeding carefully up the drive. They were proceeding carefully up the drive. The ambulance was proceeding carefully up the drive. The wind through his hair was chilly and frightfully cold, and he did not see the woman inside, but he didn't really look. As the driver walked up, went out to tell the driver, a man named Patrick Edelson, that no gurney would be needed, that there was no gurney that would be needed that day, that he told the man, Patrick Edelson, that that day no gurney would be needed. The two men went into the house. There was no answer, but he opened it anyway, and to his surprise, the woman was gone. Disappearing into the snow with barely a coat or a covering. John went through the kitchen and stepped out onto the back lawn, which was under 4 to 8 inches of snow now. He immediately saw the tiny little footprints that the woman as fast as he could. The wind and the snow in his face and the slippery footing made it very difficult for him to move very fast. Once or twice as he went, he had stopped to just lower his head and peer closer to the ground because the darkness wasn't retreating. Very quickly. The darkness wasn't retreating very quickly. He spotted the stranger a few hundred yards into the woods, near the bank of a small stream. As soon as John saw her moving away from him, he shouted, and she stopped and turned. She waited for him to approach. She smiled, that crooked, bizarre smile, and took a step towards him. John remembered that the wind had blown her hair into her mouth and it caught there, so it appeared as if she was consuming her hair, or her black raven hair was coming from the inside of her out. At this point, he wasn't quite sure. He had to lean in as she spoke because he could not hear her over the wind and the snow. But what she said to him, being just a single sentence, terrified him for the rest of his life into complete silence of ever repeating this to anybody until now. She says, "I will make you remember me. I will make you remember me. Remember me. And all that I can do." She said, and she suddenly raised her left arm and swung it towards him in a swooping arc. He felt her hand connect with his right cheek hard. And then, unfathomably, he swore an old man that he felt her fingers puncture his cheek entirely, tearing right through the flesh, and he could feel her fingertips touch his teeth, and those cold little bells, dinging against his face, and the opened wound with the thick, warm liquid pouring out of the gaping hole in the side smelled. And for 1 second, he stood there as she laughed and pushed her fingers deeper through his cheek, seeming to feel for his tongue, ripping out his teeth that were in her way. He flinched back instinctively, flinch back. He flinched back instinctively to get away from those horrible little tiny bells and claws digging into his face. And as he withdrew her hand, he felt his cheek before it became whole again in an instant. It became whole again in an instant. He sank to his knees as she walked away, running through the snow now. And this time John did not follow her. He did not beg her to stay. He did not want to help her. He did not try to rescue this grasping his face, feeling around for the gaping hole he was sure he had. Left in place of his mouth and his cheeks and his teeth. But there was nothing wrong with him at all, actually. The woman just disappeared into the mist. And a minute later, Edelson was behind him, helping him to his feet. It took an hour or so for the doctor, my grandfather, to tell me that part of the story. Sitting here on his porch, watching him smoke and reel in his mind about that night. But that was not all I could feel it. I did not want to push for more. As he filled up his pipe again, and sighed heavily. He had never spoken of this to anyone, not even Edelson. Patrick Edelson. He had not spoken of it ever. Not even on that morning that it all happened. And Edelson never asked any questions. He just helped my grandfather up. There was actually a real search for the woman, but it did not amount to much, as 16 inches of snow eventually fell that day, and the area was stifled. She had vanished. Without a trace. That began the time when my grandfather would see her in his dreams. They were the worst nightmares or night terrors he had ever had, for he never had a nightmare before meeting this woman. But eventually, all that horror, all of those nightmares began to fade away. One morning, it was 2 years after his encounter with the woman, he woke up inexplicably cold again, and almost went into a state of panic before he realized he was not cold, as some sort of premonition that he knew she had returned. But because he had left a window open, he couldn't forget the feeling of having been freezing inside his skin, as if his organs had suddenly been coated with a layer of ice. More than once, his dreams took the form of reliving his first hour with the woman, the nightmare, from the moment he had seen her standing on the border between the road and his drive. But in the dream, when she said that she'd eaten the eyes of a former farmer in Lancaster and opened her mouth to show him, he woke up stifling a scream. He was stifling a scream. He was stifling. In the dream, he woke up screaming, stifling a scream. Because as he woke up, now it was obvious that she really had killed sitting on a bench under a street light more than 100 yards away. A woman on a street bench under a street light more than 100 yards away. He was looking out the window one night in a train he was riding. He saw a woman on a bench 100 yards away that was staring at him. He just sat there looking. He didn't know what to say. He couldn't say anything. He couldn't make out if it was absolutely this woman for sure. But for some reason he was immediately convinced that it was her. Some instinct had told him that, yes, this was her. She never moved until the train that was moving pulled away. She never moved until the moving train pulled away. And then she moved. He couldn't say what it was that made him think it was her. He just felt with every fiber of his being that it absolutely was the same woman. Shortly after that, Trippy fell into a depression that had lasted almost 3 years. 3 years. And to cause he could never quite pinpoint the cause. He could never pinpoint the pinpoint of the cause. He could never find. In 1958, seven years after the night of that snowstorm in Cumberland, John was contacted by the Ohio State Police about a murder case that was being investigated in Youngstown. By that time, he was convinced that he was considered an expert in abnormal psychology and was occasionally called upon to testify in court as such. Now a detective who knew of his work and wanted to send him a stack of paperwork that represented the evidence collected so far in the killing of Father Corford, a 40-year-old Catholic priest that was 40 years old, 40-year-old Catholic priest. Half the evidence consisted of photographs of the crime scene because the material was too sensitive to send them through the mail. The detective that had very sensitive material and photographs and evidence of the crime scene wanted Yes, the detective asked if he could drive out and meet John at his hotel near Western Maryland border, where John was a convention of clinicians. He agreed, and over coffee, the detective, Terrence Brunner, gave him the materials and told him more about this mysterious case that had haunted my grandfather for so many years. Back at his hotel, in the small hours of the night, back at his hotel, during the hours of the night that were small, back at his hotel, first read Father Corvert's diary, which hadn't been kept regularly, but twice mentioned his attempts to get and help a homeless woman who had recently appeared in Youngstown. She was mute, he believed, and traumatized, but docile and apparently harmless. Docile, yes, docile, apparently harmless. A woman that was apparently harmless, that was so docile that he let her into his life and thought that she was mute. For some reason, the priest never referred to her by her name, only as the snake lady. It had been Bunner had taken quite some time to determine the origin of this nickname, which had only been revealed in a single letter to Corbett. Had written to his sister. The single letter written to his sister by the priest was only written to her about that name and the origin of the nickname, which had is revealed the first time he had seen the homeless woman. She had been standing under a tree on church grounds. He had spoken to her briefly, then got out an hour later and walked to his car. He noticed that she had gone, but that something was lying underneath the same tree in the grass. Something was lying. Something was lying in the grass under the tree she was standing under. And it was there, under the tree in the grass. Closer investigation revealed it to be a long, thick, grayish-brown snake. A long, thick, grayish-brown snake. He looked at the snake, and it was not alive, yet dead. It was a dead snake under the tree that looked quite exotic and put a real fright into Corvert. He drove the carcass directly to the animal control, which, with the help of a nearby university, later identified it as a buffer adder, considered Africa's deadliest snake, one that should not exist outside of Africa. There wasn't much more detail than that about the snake lady. The striking thing about the diary was that the striking thing about the diary striking thing was Father Corvert's writings about his travels to various libraries in the area, travels which got more extensive. The extensive travels which got more intense to each of the local libraries. There wasn't much detail about the snake lady. This striking thing. As he traveled to various libraries in the area, travel became more extensive, almost like an obsession, and expansion as they went on. The travels of the priest became more of an extension far out from where he should have been looking, almost as if an obsession had occurred. His reasons for them a pattern that the man kept checking books out farther and farther away from his home. It ranged from drug addiction to schizophrenia to witchcraft or the subjects. The subjects he looked up range from drug addiction and schizophrenia and witchcraft. Those are the subjects he looked up. One week, Gorford came to a seminary in Philadelphia, from which he withdrew books about ancient religious beliefs centered around the Middle East. They were religious beliefs that he withdrew from the Philadelphia seminary, which centered around religious beliefs around the Middle East. At one point, he'd requested hundreds of photocopies and 2 essays from the late 1900s describing the obscure, asking for hundreds of copies of hundreds of different essays and information, but specifically to that century. The thing is, he was obsessed. Beliefs among Babylonian tribes that the souls of the dead could congregate inside a single living human body for the purpose of resurrecting it. Resurrecting a human body could live and survive in a human body for the purposes of bringing it back from the dead. In Babylonian tribes. The timeline of his research coincided with the homeless woman's arrival in town. The homeless woman's arrival in town coincided with the timelines that he had so carefully written out. According to various people who had briefly seen Gorford in conversation with her. From there, John started to go through the stack of crime scene photos, crime scene photos. The scene was the church where Father Gorford conducted his services. In a wide shot of the interior taken from the back of the church, it seemed totally empty. They're looking hard. One could see that all the way in the first row views. A man was sitting, facing forward. The other photos showed this was Father Gorford, who had been killed with the 2 knife wounds to his heart. His heart had been stabbed with 2 knives that went directly into his heart. But he was sitting at the first row of the pews, facing forward. The other photos showed this was Father Gorford. 2 knife wounds to the heart, only slightly slumped farther forward. As if he had been sitting on the pew, turned partially sideways, perhaps speaking to someone sitting beside him. He was perhaps speaking to somebody who was sitting beside him. Is how his body was positioned. The other photos, the other photos small, smaller than small, done in a pencil. Tiny writing that was left by his left hand was so small that it done in a pencil, almost looking like a child. Like a child. Had been bored. The police knew of the writing but did not know its origin. The style of the letters, which spelled out completely nonsensical, unconnected words, made my grandfather set the photos aside and light his pipe to calm himself. He called Dara's Brunner to see if it had not. If this man, Dara's Brunner, had not left his area to see if he maybe had not left the area to see if Dara's Brunner left the area or not. My grandfather left his hotel in order to walk the 12 blocks across down Grantsville to the police station, where Brunner was meeting with a colleague. He needed to talk to the man in person because he recognized the letters of the killer and printed on that view from some paint writing his night visitor had made on the windowsill of his guest room in 1951. So in 1951, the same woman made the same passage or writings in his guest bedroom as she did, or it did. On this piece of paper, and on the pew, and on the windowsill. She had taken a pen off a table and done it, making just 3 or 4 words out of nothing and putting odd-looking accents over the H's and V's. H's and V's. The streets were very, very quiet. My grandfather was walking across the little town square when everything around him started to lose its color all at once. Everything stopped and lost its color. All the color faded where he was walking all at once. Bleeding out of every tree. All the color would bleed out of every tree. Every street sign, every car parked against the curb. He began to feel sick to his stomach. He was seized with a heavy, dry cough, and he made his way to the closest branch. The closest bench. He made his way to the closest bench and sat down and put his head between his knees to the police. After a minute, he stood up and tried to regain his balance. Somehow he knew. He told me that as long as he didn't take another single step towards the police station, that would lead to telling them what he knew, he would be all right. Everything would be all right. As long as he didn't tell anybody. As long as he kept the secret to himself. As long as he didn't take it farther. He turned and began to walk back in the other direction, back to where he came from. With every single step, he felt better. The color came back into the world around him, and the pain in his neck subsided. Soon he began to run as he was back into the lobby of the hotel. He was back running into the library of the hotel. He was back in, running into the lobby without the pain, without all the problems he had. Soon, the desk clerk offered to call an ambulance, but my grandfather said no. He told the clerk that if anybody called, but through to his room, he should tell him that he had taken ill. He made his way upstairs and collapsed on the bed, utterly exhausted. And he remembered crying, weeping for what, or why, or who, or out of fear, or relief. But nobody, even including my grandfather, does not really know, but he just sat there and he wept for hours, almost like cathartically cleansing his soul. He told no one of the happenings. He made his way through life, and he would never talk about the woman again. He would send feedback to the crime scene evidence without a note. So he sends back the evidence without a note to the crime scene investigator, intending to speak of that woman and perhaps sending the police after her. He felt that he had raged something that was in control of her. Somebody was in control of her. Not necessarily who she once was or wanted to be or was underneath that exterior of evil that lurked behind that wicked smile. But by intending to speak of that woman and perhaps sending the police after her, he felt he'd raged her. That night was the longest of his life as he lay there and waited for that invisible hand to maybe return to strike him, to strangle him, to choke him, to kill him. He went to church for the first time in his life 2 weeks later, and he fully embraced Christianity and Catholicism. That summer, he never stopped. There's where his story of the woman ended. Decades passed, and truly nothing strange ever happened to him again. He wanted to correlate his peace with events to his acceptance of spirituality, but he wasn't sure about it. He thought perhaps it was more about his refusal to act on his suspicions than anything else. That he felt something, sensed something, that he wasn't a threat anymore. As he grew older, his memories of the terrible thing began to fade. Terrible memories began to fade out of his mind. He told me life was so long, so very arduously long, and that the human mind could learn to endure and bury almost anything. The world was populated with people who had lost children in accidents, Holocaust survivors, bomb threats, bombs, wars, violence, domestic violence, car crashes, plane crashes, you name it, they've lost it. And yet he was there, and when he reached the end, or the ending of his life, a certain duration, these things slowly faded away. No matter how much they shook our beliefs, time inevitably did not work on your soul the same way. Your experiences never allow you to be the same. The slow decades labored in the dark field of the subconscious to overcome worried that telling this story held some power, and he may pass it on to me. He shook his head firmly and said no, he didn't think so, and that all that had ended was 40 years ago. But is there really a statute of limitations on ghosts coming back? On evil getting its grips into you, or is it lurking just behind the curtain at all times? That was my question. The fact that he had never encountered anything of the supernatural again led him to believe that he was safe. He led him to believe he was safe because he had never encountered anything of the supernatural that he knew of again. Just maybe there was an explanation of the events that lay deep within the parts of his mind that he never explored. Parts of his mind that he never explored. And maybe he shouldn't have. Still, I told myself on that night that the secret would stay with me until I departed from this world. Which was only partially to humor him. That the secret would stay with me. Some of that vow was due to my own fears of the unknown, the specters that the story had raised, of a realm beyond my understanding, comprehension, or beliefs. It was just better not to speak of it. I felt safer. The story was told to me in the year of 1983 and 2012. My grandfather was 90 years old. We'd remained close, though I'd since graduated from college and gone to have my own career as a doctor. I still visited him every year at Christmas. He continued to live on his own in Solomons, Maryland, a 4-hour drive from Cumberland. One day, December 1st, I arrived there to stay for a couple of days, and we exchanged our presents, and had a dinner like always. He was very healthy and of sound mind and body, the result of a very studious and disciplined lifestyle living. I took him out to a nice restaurant in town the night after Christmas. I started to drive back to Boston afterwards. We got in the car at the restaurant and drove to his house. I remembered that he had forgotten to lock his front door, which normally was not a big deal, as he sometimes did it. Or he just didn't bother. Where they live was so very safe, so very out of the way of everybody else, that it was no point in locking your door. We went into the house and he told me to go down into the basement and take a box of toys there back to my niece and nephew. I went down the stairs into the unfinished basement. There was virtually nothing down there but a big table and a chair and boxes of memories. Memories that were in boxes and boxes filled with memories. When I turned on the light, which hung from a chain, I saw something that had been written on the gray cement wall on the east side of the room. scrawled in white chalk. I stared at those words at first, not understanding what they meant, because the first few of them were nonsensical scribbling letters a foot high that didn't make sense, but below that there was an actual sentence. The words said, "Can you hear the bells?" A question, a feeling of terror washed over me. I almost lost consciousness right then and there. I heard my grandfather's feet on the stairs above me, and I called out for him to stop. But something about the tone of my voice so frightened made him come farther, and so he and I both stood and looked at what was written on the wall. His face was stony. I could see where the white chalk had come from. It had been taken from a plastic tub of it that was one of the presents my grandfather had bought for my niece and nephew. He said to me, "It can't be, it can't be, it can't be, this can't be, this can't be, no, 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 no." Without saying a word, I guided him back to the staircase and led him upwards, holding his arms tight so he wouldn't fall. We got to stop at the top of the stairs and walk quickly to the front door. He hadn't turned on the house lights yet, except for the one in the kitchen. I could feel the darkness pressing in on us terribly. The move to the door seemed to take forever. I didn't look left or right to fear of what I might see. I ushered Grandpa to the door and opened the door for him, and he got in. I slammed the door shut fast and trotted around to the driver's side and tried to make it so that Grandpa wouldn't notice me. Quickly glance into the back seat in case something was there, something that might have been gotten into the back seat. I didn't want him to see me glance to check the back seat. Only when the doors were locked and the engines did I feel safe. Grandpa asked me where we were going, and I said I didn't know. He said maybe she's still here somewhere. And I nodded, and we pulled out of the driveway. It was my intent to start driving us towards Boston, and we never would ever come back. Never. I would not let him. Three turns through the neighborhood was a street called Beach Run. The road, just a single lane, was very quiet, and my headlights picked up a figure up ahead, a human figure. It was a small woman standing. second that I saw her, I looked for a second at my grandfather in the dark. His eyes were wide, staring through the windshield to the woman who turned towards us. And then she began to walk towards the car. I told Grandpa not to move, but he had no intent of doing so. The woman was old, so very old. The so very old woman was walking towards the car. Her hair was long and dirty. The dirty long hair was long and dirty. The dirty hair was long. It wrapped around her shoulders. She wore a plain dress, tattered shoes. When she walked, it was with a marble limp, marked limp. One my grandfather recognized immediately. Her eyes went to her left, and then they stopped. There were the bells, except they had become an old and rusted over the years, decades that seemed to be a permanent part of her flesh, which was blackened all around them. They must have been a deep infection at where one mutilated object. They made not a sound, not a single sound now at all. It had been 63 years since my grandfather had heard them in the middle of the night, as he sat in his room frightened of the same woman who had never forgotten him. She looked even older than her years, ancient, as sick as it is possible for a living human being to look, but at least she was mortal. She had aged, and eventually she would have to die. Freed of whatever controlled her, free of whatever horrible thing she had done over a stretch of time so long I can barely conceive it. She had traveled, she killed without anyone ever looking her way anywhere for good. She staggered forward 3 more steps until we could see every detail of her withered body. She had no expression on her face, only stared blankly like a statue. I heard Grandpa's emit a small wheeze as he began to have more difficulty breathing. I took my foot off the brake and hit the gas pedal then, and we swerved around her and sped up. I took a sudden right turn and then led us to the main road. I took a sudden left turn as he was wheezing in the seat next to me. We got there. I drove us well over the speed limit to the highway. We were there in 3 minutes. I kept saying, it's okay. And Grandpa said nothing, nor did he say anything for almost 2 hours. When we finally pulled into the gas station, I turned off the radio and he sat with tears in his eyes, gripping the door handle tightly. Finally he said he was all right, that he was okay, and he was. He died 6 months ago of viral pneumonia, only 8 months after leaving his house that night, which neither of us ever returned to. flooding at his house. I let a real estate agent handle every detail of the sale, so my grandfather would never, ever have to be alone. Be alone, be alone, be alone, be alone. He accepted the helper without complaint, and how many nights have I spent wondering how long it will take for the woman to die so that there's no chance I'll be walking alone one night and to feel her presence and turn and see that she's somehow found her way to Boston, waiting to demonstrate to me that she was not who I think or thought or expected her to be. I'm not as mentally strong as my grandfather, and I know it. I know it. I know my mind would break if she were to touch me, if I were to reach out to me in the darkness with a hand that had fused with bells